Today we're gonna take this Mojave Grom and turn it into an absolute beast, but first, you guys wanted to see this budget brushless system on 3S, so let's see how that works. Before we take it out though, I wanna go ahead and install these hot racing steel output cups, and while we're installing them, I wanna answer a few questions that you guys had from the last video. The first question I got was about why I left the ESC in here. That was simply a cost-saving measure. The ESC is also the servo mount, so if I took that ESC out of there, I would have had to have purchased a replacement mount for the servo, and even though we weren't using the ESC, it didn't really hurt anything to leave it in there, and it saved a few bucks, which was the point of that installation. The second one was, why did I use this Hobbywing ESC instead of something cheaper like a Surpass ESC motor combo? Whereas the Surpass motors really aren't that bad, their ESCs, especially the smaller Generation 1 ESCs, tend to not last very long, and I think this motor and ESC combination is probably the most reliable setup you can get. You could definitely get away with the 30 amp ESC here, but it's not going to run quite as cool, and you would probably need a fan on it. Speaking of which, I was also asked why I didn't put fans on the motor or ESC, and that was also a cost-saving measure. On 2S, this combination is pretty understressed, and it really doesn't need a heatsink or fan. I'm not entirely sure if that'll be true for 3S, but we're going to find out, because I'm not going to put a heatsink or fan on those, and we're going to check with a thermal camera and see just how hot they get on 3S. Changing out these output cups is a lot easier on this car than it is on most RC cars. Like the X-Max, these actually are held in from the outside, so all you need to do is remove a screw and then take the output cup off. And you can see here, it's just these two little ears that hold the output cup into the differential gear. That's why we're going to go with metal. Since we're going to be screwing into a plastic side gear, we don't need thread lock here. Finally, and this is a question I get quite often on the channel, why did I only get 19 miles an hour when plenty of other people are getting higher speeds with this truck in stock form? And the answer to that is, I do my speed testing off-road in real-world conditions that I think the average basher will actually experience. Because of that, the speeds you see on this channel are often going to be lower than what you're going to see on other channels, but they'll probably also more accurately represent what you can expect to experience if you get one of these cars. I don't think that maximum on-road speed is an invalid test, it's just a different way of doing things. All right, there we go. That should be a pretty good upgrade for the increased power of 3S. There's just one more thing we need to do, and that's to take these pins off of here and swap the XT60 back on. I did want to reiterate that this setup was just for testing with this battery. I would definitely not recommend having these bare pins like this because they're not held in properly and you could plug them in backwards, destroying your ESC and possibly causing a fire. I did have one commenter mention that you can actually take this battery apart and solder a balance lead onto these cells. I'm not going to get into that because that's actually a fairly risky procedure, but if you know what you're doing, these batteries are pretty easy to take apart. When we come back from testing this, we're going to be doing some pretty serious modifications to it, including putting this Mamba Micro X2 system in here. But for now, let's get a 3S battery in this thing, see how it does on this budget system. All right, let's see just how fast this thing is on 3S. Given how hard it was to control on 2S brushless, I'm not expecting it to be too much faster. Definitely got the power. Be interesting to see if we can go full throttle. That's about half throttle. These tires just don't have a ton of traction on this surface. Definitely quick. Not able to get full throttle though. There, full throttle. All right, let's see what that was. Okay, 34 miles an hour. That's pretty good. Let's see if this drivetrain can handle 3S bashing. So are things getting hot? Not really. As you can see here, both the motor and the ESC are basically ice cold even on 3S. However, somewhat unsurprisingly, we did manage to break it. This left rear tire is just spinning freely. Let's see what happened. Whenever working on your cars, make sure you clear out the sockets on screws before you take them out. This is one of the main reasons why screws get stripped. A dental pick is a fantastic tool for this. All right, let's see what happened here. I suspect our awesome upgraded metal output cup stripped the plastic gear internally. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you upgrade one thing without upgrading another. That actually looks fine. Let's dig in deeper. All right, what do you think? Plastic gear carnage? Surprisingly, no. So what happened to this differential? Let's take a closer look at this gear. That gear looks absolutely fine. I don't think it's actually broke at all. I think this screw just loosened up, and looking at this, you can tell that this outdrive doesn't quite go all the way into the side gear like the stock one does. So I would probably not recommend using these outdrives as they don't really seem to fit properly. But none of that matters because I've got a set of the elusive 311193 oil-filled differentials, and to go along with that, we've got a whole bunch of upgrade parts. Let's turn this thing into a monster. Another really common question I get is what batteries I use. I usually don't talk about my batteries because often I'm not using the ideal ones. This is just a 3S drone battery that I happen to have on hand, but it's way smaller than this battery compartment and probably isn't the best battery for this setup. However, I did just pick up this SMC high voltage LiPo. These things are really high quality and fits the tray perfectly. We're gonna use this for the monster testing. For maximum stability, these narrow arms have got to go, and we're gonna be swapping in the significantly wider arms from the Granite. We aren't, however, going to be using the shocks from the Granite. I've got something special for that. One thing I find kind of crazy is even though the Granite has much wider arms, the Mojave body is massive compared to the Granite body. Look at this. Now, obviously, the Mojave is a different kind of truck, and the body hangs over the bumpers, but the size difference really is incredible. A small but interesting difference is the length of the screws that hold these differential covers on. The ones on the Mojave are significantly longer. You can also see just how much longer the arms are on the Granite. However, the shock mounts are in the same place, so it looks like that additional length is outboard of the shocks. The rear hubs do look identical between the two vehicles. We do need to remove these stub axles from the Granite suspension because we got these really nice Power Hobby CVDs for the front and rear. I've never tried these before. Hopefully they'll be able to hold up to that 4S power. To take these apart, you have to pull this screw out. If you don't have a pair of pliers, just stick them in a wheel and then you can remove the screw. Once that's out, we can just pull this hex off and push this through. Now, if you like seeing big modifications to brand new vehicles, make sure you get subscribed. We're doing that kind of stuff here all the time. These Power Hobby CVDs come in two slightly different lengths. I'm assuming the shorter ones go in the rear. I guess we're gonna find out. One way to tell how accurately something was made is how well the bearings fit. These bearings are very precise, and if they fit well, it's usually a good sign. These bearings fit really, really nicely. Now we'll just get this back in here. I think it's interesting that Power Hobby chose to use the same stub axle design as stock. That design is to accommodate the unique way the stock axles are retained, and it wasn't really necessary for this, but it is a decent setup. And hopefully this will fit just like the stock arms do. Seems to be no problem. Let's get the other side on. Okay, I put those arms on the wrong vehicle just to see if you were paying attention. Let's put them on the right vehicle and see if they fit. Yep, they still fit just fine. So do you think this thing's gonna be able to hold up to 4S power? Am I making it better by making it wider, or am I just gonna make it different? Put your predictions down in the comments. The next upgrade are going to be these really nice looking hot racing emulsion style all metal shocks. These shocks come with 2 extra sets of springs for tuning, and they don't come oil filled, so I'm just going to have to guess at the oil weight. Let's try some 40. These shocks actually look really well made. They've even got metal perches, and they've got kind of a unique design where the seal is down here at the outside as opposed to being up here at the top. Filling an emulsion style shock is easy. You just fill it all the way to the top, put the cap on, tighten it up, remove the bleeder screw, and then push the shock rod up and reinstall the bleeder screw. These emulsion style shocks are designed to have some air in them, so you don't really need to worry about completely bleeding them out. See how that feels. Compared to a stock shock, that is quite a bit stiffer, but let's give it a try anyway, because we're gonna be putting quite a bit more weight in this car. Actually feels pretty good. Let's get the other side done. I'm definitely curious to see how these shocks work out. I've had mixed results with aftermarket shocks, but Hot Racing is a pretty good brand, so I'm hoping these shocks are gonna be good ones. They certainly feel high quality. One of the problems I've had with aftermarket shocks though is getting parts for them. A lot of these shocks, there's just no way to get replacement parts for them. So if you break something, you're pretty much just gonna have to replace the entire shock. On these little ones, that's not that big of a deal, but on larger shocks, that can get pretty expensive. All right, guys, I think it looks really, really awesome. Now, the front end's basically gonna be the same as the back, so let's just, and there we go. You may notice we don't have the Power Hobby CVDs in the front, and that's because these probably shouldn't be 2 lengths. These longer ones don't fit in the front, and they don't fit in the back. And it's not a matter of putting these arms on this chassis that's causing the problem. I tried with the original chassis, had the same problem. Another thing I noticed is that the stock hubs on the Mojave are actually shorter than the stock hubs on the Granite. That being said, with this long chassis and wide suspension, this thing's gonna be a beast. I get the feeling we're gonna have to do some trimming on this body before this is over. Before we get into that, let's get these electronics swapped out. We're gonna be doing basically the exact opposite of a budget build with this Mamba Micro X2 from Castle and its matching censored 1010 5600 kV motor. And we'll take that centerpiece off. We can get this motor out. And peel up the ESC. We're also going to go ahead and remove the stock ESC because we do have one of the blank servo mounts available. To go along with this 1010 size motor, we're going to be using a Hot Racing 1/8 bore 0.5 mod pinion gear. This one is 17 tooth, which is 1 tooth less than stock. I think it's going to be just fine for this 5600 kV motor. We're also going to be using this GPM adjustable motor mount. I would definitely recommend not using the stock screws for this motor mount. The last time I did one of these installs, I broke 2 of these screws off. They seem to be strangely brittle, and whereas they're fine in plastic, they don't seem to do well in this application. Normally, I wouldn't recommend using stainless screws. It's just what I happen to have on hand. And of course, make sure your screws aren't so long that they're going to dig into something inside your motor and destroy it. It's always a really good idea to clean your pinions and grub screws with rubbing alcohol before installing them. These seem clean, but they aren't. Check this out. That's all oil for manufacturing, and it will stop the thread locker from working properly. Also, if you get a pinion with opposing grub screws, just use one of them. Opposing grub screws really isn't the way to do 2 grub screws. They should be at 90 degrees to each other. If they're made opposing, the only thing that will be bearing on the shaft is the grub screw on each side. What you really want is for the motor shaft to be bearing on one whole side of the pinion, and then the grub screw just locking it in place. Be careful not to over tighten these little grub screws. They can be stripped out pretty easily. At least on my particular example, and I'm sure on yours as well, we're actually going to have to rotate this front end bell in order to get these wires in the correct place. Otherwise, they're going to interfere with this top brace. We just remove these 3 screws. Rotate the end bell 120 degrees clockwise. It might be pretty tight. Now you can see as we put this in, the wires are down here out of the way. Getting the mesh correct is kind of a pain because you can only really check the mesh with this center brace on, and you can only adjust it with the center brace off. I'm not going to subject you to that fight. I'll get it done and we'll move on to the next step. Guys, I've been in this hobby for almost 25 years, and I can tell you that setting the adjustment on that motor mount was one of the worst things I've ever done. There's no way to check the mesh when it's together, so I ended up drilling a hole so I could actually make sure the mesh was good. Moral of the story, just get the mount that's preset for your pinion and avoid the frustration. All right, let's move on. Next up, we need to mount the ESC. I'm going to try to put it right here. Hopefully it'll fit under the body. It should, because this really isn't much taller than the stock ESC in this location, but let's find out. Yeah, it should fit perfectly right there. Let's get it stuck down. And to do that, we're just gonna be using my favorite 3M VHB. One thing to know about pressure adhesives like 3M VHB is that they actually take some time to set up. When you first install something with VHB, you're only gonna get about 50% adhesion. After 24 hours, that'll bump up to 90%. So the longer you can wait before bashing, the better. It looks like we'll be able to stick the receiver right down in here. This is gonna turn out to be a pretty clean install. Let me get this wiring tidied up. And there we go, guys. The electronics are done, and I think that's a really clean install. Let's get some tires on here. For those tires, we're going to be stepping up to the ones from the Granite Grom. They are both taller and wider. And between this and the wider suspension, I'm hoping this is going to give us more traction and stability for that 4S power. Whether or not that's actually going to work out is something we're just going to have to find out. Though I think we are going to end up with the largest Grom ever made. Though to do so is probably going to require some sacrifice. And if you're squeamish, you might want to avert your gaze for this next part. Because unfortunately now, this body does not fit on here, and we're going to have to do some trimming. And we're just going to use a pair of these curved Lexan scissors in order to do this. You could also score this line with a sharp razor blade and then snap the Lexan off. In this case, either way should work fine. If you've got a lot to do or a lot of straight lines and difficult corners to cut, scoring and then breaking the pieces off definitely works better. And I know this may feel like sacrilege to some of you guys, so if you appreciate me doing it so you don't have to, why don't you go ahead and get subscribed? That doesn't look too bad. Let's see how it fits. Oh yeah, that should give us plenty of clearance. Let me do the other side. I don't know, guys. I think that looks pretty awesome. What do you think? And the shock tuning is actually really good, too. I also had to trim the front bumper a little bit, but overall, I think it looks fairly factory. Let's go see how it runs. All right, straight to 4S. Let's see just how fast this thing actually is. Oh, it's gonna be a handful. That was about a quarter throttle. Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to get anywhere near full throttle on this. All right, let's try one more pass. All right, I'm gonna try it one more time. He is really squirrely, guys. All right, let's see how fast that was. Okay, somewhere in those runs, we got 53 miles an hour. That's pretty darn fast for a little Mojave Grom. Let's see how she bashes. right, guys, well, that was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we did break it. Unsurprisingly, it was the last stock part we left in here that broke. If we'd have been able to put the Power Hobby CVDs in the front, that probably wouldn't have happened. This thing is fast and powerful and a lot of fun. During those speed runs, I never got anywhere near full throttle. With some good foams and a skilled speedrunner, you could probably get 65 miles an hour out of this same setup, no problem. I really like these hot racing shocks. They're holding up well. This castle combo is absolutely awesome. And running this truck widened with bigger tires definitely gives it a different feel. Now, should you do this? I'm not sure. If you really like to modify stuff, this is a fun modification to do. But the stock truck, even with the stock brushed system, is a ton of fun. However, if you do want to do this, all you're going to need is a Castle 1010 motor. This is a 5600 kV. I'd probably recommend the 4400 kV instead. You can use the stock gear ratio with that, which means you can use the stock motor mount. This is a Castle Mamba Micro X2 ESC. And then I've just got my choice of receiver down there. You're going to need a hot racing pinion gear. This is 1/8 inch bore. Again, I'd recommend going with 18 tooth so you can use the stock motor mount and avoid all the frustration of trying to perfect this adjustable motor mount. Very little modification needs to be done. Unlike on the Typhon, this screw hole did not need to be trimmed out. It's back far enough that it's not in the way. And overall, this has been a really fun upgrade. I think I'm going to keep it this way for a while, maybe put some different tires on it. Definitely get those front CVDs swapped out. If you're going to do this, just get the arrm all metal CVD set. It's guaranteed to work. So what do you think about this upgrade, guys? Let me know down in the comments. Make sure you get subscribed, then take a look at one of these videos.